Hi, welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day no matter what it is that you're getting up to. For today's free wirework tutorial, I would like to share with you an idea for a design that can be infinitely customizable, made completely unique. Honestly, I've been making these for about 6 or 7 years now, and I don't believe I've ever made one exactly the same. So I've got a couple of historical examples to show you. Here's one with just a single gemstone. And here's one that's just hammered, no gemstones at all. There's one here which is absolutely full of beautiful neon apatites. And then my last one here is slightly different in design. It's got a kind of a reverse action here up on the handle. I do enjoy making these. I'm a very peaceful person, something of a pacifist, but I do enjoy making little swords. So for today's YouTube tutorial, I'm going to be using 1.25 or 16 gauge wire for the main framework. You can take that to a slightly heavier gauge if you wish to, and then 0.4 or 26 gauge wire to add in the detail. We will be using a basic jeweler's hammer. Not a very expensive one at all. I think this was £3 or £4, so no more than sort of $6 or $7 really. And a steel block to go with. So we will get on with the tutorial. If you'd like to join me down at the board, I will just give you a slightly closer look at some of those swords I've just shown you. So there's one which has got just a couple of neon apatites. It's in two-tone, that's silver coloured copper wire and some raw copper wire. This one is all raw copper with a single labradorite facet in the centre. Neon apatite with copper and a lovely swirly design at the top. And then this one has got no gemstones whatsoever. It's also got a traditional large open bail. These ones are designed to be worn on quite a flat choker, maybe a piece of ribbon, something similar to that. This one's actually got the two coils at the top, and these can be individually added to the ends of some chain. So this is the one that we're going to kind of take a bit of a closer look at for today. Just going to pop those other ones out of the way. And I'm going to be remaking this design, but using some 3mm faceted Ruby Zoisite, again with the raw copper. So to begin with, I'm working with around about 14 inches or so. This is 1.25mm or 16 gauge raw copper wire, and I am just going to grip hold of that and give that a lovely smooth to try and get that a little bit warm and ready to work. So what I'm going to do is estimate approximately where the centre of the wire is and just put a really very sharp bend in there to begin with. Now I'm right dominant, and what usually happens is I estimate the centre and then I'm always short on the right and long on the left. So I'm just going to move that over a little bit and see if that has worked for us. Just about. Close enough as far as I'm concerned. So what I'm going to do is I've got that nice sharp bend to work on. I've put a little bend in there to begin with. What I'm going to do is just put a little bit of pressure on that point, drawing the two sides closer together. And I'm doing this very, very slowly. What will want to happen is the wire will want to twist in your hand, which you can easily fix afterwards. But for me, it's kind of better if they just don't go to that stage. So I'm going to close up the tip of the sword, what's going to become the tip of the sword. And as I say, this was halfway along that 14 or so inch length. I'm just going to give that a bit of a straighten up to make sure I'm happy with that. Before I start really squeezing that end piece, what I'm going to do is flare the sword so that we have a V shape down at the bottom, and then it opens out to the width of my bead. Now these apatites are only 2mm apatites, and I have threaded some Ruby Zoisite 3mm facets. So I'm going to need to take that slightly further apart on the piece I'm going to show you now. So I'm just going to grip the end here, and just slightly open that out, and then I'm going to put an angle on either side to bring each side up to a sort of a straight line, as it were, and I'd like to try and get those reasonably symmetrical. And you can play around with that obviously a little bit more to make sure that you're happy with that. I'm looking to be able to set my gemstones in the channel that we're creating here, but I do want this down at the bottom now to be tightened up. So I'm just going to take the end of my bent chain nose pliers. I'm just going to draw that really neatly together. In splaying the wires first, you get a much better opportunity to grip this and stop it from flipping over. So I'm quite happy with how that's looking. And we're going to form the first kind of shape that we're looking to work with. So I'm just warming up the wire ever so slightly. And I'm going to start by putting a right angle on the right hand side. And then I want to replicate that on the other side. So I just need to make sure that they're as even as possible. A little bit lower on the left there. So I'm just going to push that back into position until I'm happy that they are indeed symmetrical. So it's easier at this stage to make any minor corrections and make sure you're happy with just how symmetrical the design is starting to look. So just kind of check every couple of moments or so to make sure that you are indeed happy with that. So I'm quite happy with how that's looking now. So the next tool that we need are my round nose pliers. Well, actually what I'm going to do is to generate a downward bend first. And I think actually some flat facing pliers with a very broad tip will give me the kind of measuring effect I'm looking for. So I'm going to push down all the way. So we're just doing right angles at the moment. So that's on the first side. I'm right dominant, so I'm just going to flip that over and make sure that I'm happy with that symmetry. Put another right angle bend into position. So you've got a reasonably pointed tip. All should be nice and flat, as if it's between two plates of glass. Or panes of glass, I suppose. Once you've got those two downward bends, we're going to bring in the round nose pliers. So to make the effect here on the ends, what I like to do is to roll the pliers up. So we're going to start down from where we've created that right angle and roll around the round nose pliers until they match up with the first flat angle that we created. Once that reaches the right space, you can draw the tail around, and you're going to do exactly the same on the second side now. So start further downwards on the down facing section than you would imagine you need to, and then roll the design around until the tine of the plier sits flush with the first angle that you made, and then you can draw those two ends over. Now again, this is the time, each time you make a new little shape, make sure that you're happy with it, because in a moment we're going to start hammering that shape, and we do particularly want it to be right before we do that. So the next thing I'm going to do is just very gently open this out. I'm going to make any little moderations that I need to make, or modifications if you prefer. I'm going to pop the pliers into there, make sure that I'm happy with all of that sitting, and then I'm going to pop up inside the paperclip effect that we've just created. What I want to do is have a straight line as if it's continuing from where we were heading up on the side of the sword. So I'm just going to push that up at a right angle. That looks reasonably close to me. It'll be easier just to make sure that that's exactly how you want it to be in just a second. So again, taking a second to make sure that I'm happy with those angles. Pliers up inside. Might take that a little bit more to the right, and then I'm going to use my thumb to brute force that up into position. So what we want is that to be just as broad as the sword beneath where the handle is, and this is going to become the hilt of the sword. So I'm going to take a second now to make sure that this is all exactly how I want it to be. So I'm reasonably happy with that. You can obviously take a little bit more time if you'd like to. What I'm going to do now is bring in the block. As usual, mine is on a rubber backing, just to try and deaden the noise slightly. So what I'm going to do is, to begin with, I'm going to hammer that point at the end. Just to try and get that nice and smooth and straight. And also I'm just going to pop in and give that a gentle squeeze. Now I want to make sure that there's enough space for my gemstones to sit inside the channel we've created on the blade of the sword. So I'm going to apply a great deal of downward pressure. Sorry, it's cold here today, so my rings are slipping around. There we go. A great deal of downward pressure here with my non-dominant hand, so that when I strike the blade of the sword, it doesn't start to move around. have had some comments about the white spots on my nails. It is not a deficiency. It is in fact me being a bit of a lemon and hitting myself on the hand with the hammer when you're not watching. So again, I want to hammer the handle part of the sword, but I don't want to go too far up onto the hilt. I'm just at this stage going to hammer the handle into a nice flat and strong position. Now you can see that this is starting to open up slightly, so I'm just going to use my pliers to push that down before I hammer again. So I'm quite happy with how that's looking now. So I'm just going to draw the block out of position. I will need to pick up my pliers that have just fallen on the floor in a moment though. So the reason we've not hammered up here is because we're going to make a lovely swirly effect with that at some point. But what I am going to do is very gently just splay these two sides apart. You do need to make sure that you're warming the wire at this stage and not forcing it. I'm actually just using the curvature of my thumb to gently prise that, because no matter if you've stopped just here as we have planned to, there will still be a little bit of hardening of the wire just up here. So what I've done now is I've added my beads of choice, and I've only put a couple on the reel. You'll need to put them onto your wire, and the idea is to have that on the reel so you only use exactly the right amount that you need. You're not going to be wasteful. So you would need to ensure that you have enough to fill from the place where the blade opens up to north of the handle and onto the hilt. I quite like to have a jewelled hilt, so you'd need to ensure that you had enough. So patently I don't, but I'm only going to show you a couple of times on how to channel set the gemstones onto the blade of your sword. So I'm going to allow those gems to slide back towards the reel for now. And I'm going to start by winding on one side, and I'm going to come over the top of my blade, and I'm just going to take the tail and bring that around so that it covers 3 times. So that's once and twice, and then for a 3rd time. And then you can trim that away neatly, which is where I need to go to the floor because that's where they went to. Sorry if you saw the top of my head then. I'm just going to trim away neatly on the back, and then make sure that I'm happy with the positioning of that. So I just need to take that up slightly. So my first gemstone is going to sit at the point where we splayed the blade apart there. Just going to make sure that that coil of 3 is nice and neat and tidy before giving that a gentle squeeze. And then we'll start by setting those channel set gemstones. Now in one of the pieces, which is just here, I've done a little bit more of an interesting weave on the blade, and there are no gemstones. In one of the other pieces, there's just a single gemstone where the blade becomes the hilt at the point where the handles are. So you've got lots of options in how to make that completely unique to you. And as I say, I've made possibly 100 of these over the last 6 years or so, and no 2 of them have ever been the same. Different gemstones, different designs, different angles on the handles. You've got so many different ways that you can do this. You can even come back later and put jewels on either side of the handle if you prefer. You could even jewel the whole thing. It's entirely up to you. So I've just neatened up those coils slightly, and I'm going to start by bringing the first gemstone on my strand into position. Open up the sword so that you can see that sitting exactly in the centre. If you haven't left yourself quite enough room, you do have an opportunity right now to just open the bottom of the blade out slightly. Please be very, very gentle at this stage because you have weakened and hardened the wire at the same time. So I'm just going to give that a bit of a modification just to make sure that that is going to sit exactly into position. So just pop that out the way and then wind from one side on the top to the other side on the top, and then 1, 2 and 3. Pull that down into position. What we're going to do is make sure that that coil is nice and tidy, like so, and then give that a very gentle squeeze. We're going to have the wire then going underneath on the back of the design without a gemstone, and we're going to wind 3 times around where we started from. So that's 1 and 2 and 3 over the top. Give that a gentle squeeze to put that into position. We're just going to add 1 more gemstone, and then we'll do a little bit of, here's one I made earlier, in just a second. So over the top, from top side to top side, 1 and 2 and 3, and then a pass underneath without any gemstones at all. So a little bit of a squish to make sure that's nice and neat and tidy. So in a second I will show you one that I made earlier. So you can see this is very similar to the piece we were working on a second ago, and all I've done is channel set all the way up the hilt of the sword. Once I get to the top, my wire is finishing coming over the top, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a diagonal now with 2 of those beads in position, and then just continue as if that wasn't there. Now obviously, because I needed to demonstrate how to begin this section of wire has actually been cut off the reel, so normally I would still be working from the reel here. So what I'm going to do is draw the wire underneath and just continue exactly as we were before. So I'm just going to add a few more, and then I will come back to you in just a second. So I've added another couple of beads just on the hilt of my sword, and I'm going to finish by wrapping 3 times on the far side. And then what I think I might do is just add a couple of wraps, drawing those 2 strands back together. So again, being super respectful of the wire. I just want those to come slightly closer together now. And I'm going to choose my weave, and I think I'll probably just do a 3 to 3 basket weave because it matches in with the channel setting quite nicely. So 1 and 2 and 3 down the center. Basket weave, you're basically going in opposite, so over the top, down the center. I've done 3 on one side, 3 on the other side. 1 and 2 and 3, and just continue until you're happy with the distance that you have traveled, if you've covered enough, and if you're really just pleased aesthetically with how it's coming together. So I'm just going to do 1 more little wrap there, 1 and 2 and 3. I'm going to flip that over onto the back, find my trimmers, trying to trim the end so that it sits inside the design and is less likely to haunt you later by being naughty. So just going to give that a very gentle squeeze to make sure that that's set, and then just push that down so the weaving is nice and tight and packed. Very, very gentle little squeeze at the top there, nothing too serious. So what I'm going to do now is a swirly sword end like this one, and you'll notice that this piece has been hammered in a diamond faceting finish, and I'll show you how to achieve that in just a second. So what we're going to do, now you can do this with weaving, this design, or without weaving. I kind of like it without, so that's what we're going to do for now. I'm pinching with my non-dominant hand and drawing over to the right hand side, and what I'm going to do now is just pinch again with the non-dominant hand to make a lovely circular shape up at the top here, which is replicating the ball end that you will see on some swords. It's almost like a counterbalance. So just drawing that all the way around until it passes over the top where we did that little bit of weaving. Draw that round into position. And what I'm going to do is use one of these pieces to tie around. I'm going to start at the bottom there, take that tail all the way around the neck that we created, finishing off on the back. I'm going to grab my cutters, and what I'm going to do is end that about halfway across the back of the design, and give that a squeeze to push that down into the back of that weaving that we just did, all the while not disturbing the shape that we've created. So I'm going to take my second wire now. That was the lower of the 2, so this is the upper one. I'm going to really pinch super hard now, take that tail all the way around one time, and then cross it underneath the other. And I think I'm going to replicate this design here because I kind of like that one. So I'm just going to make sure that that double curve that we've just made at the top there is nice and flat and centralised. And then I think I'm going to cut a little bit of that away, like so, and put a very, very useful ever-present coil onto the top there. So coming to the tip of the wire and the tip of my round nose pliers, I'm going to start turning that as we go. Pull that into position. And then switch to my flat facing pliers and draw that over the face. Push that down with your flat facing pliers and get that into a semblance of pleasant faced positioning. So I'm going to show you now how you can hammer the top section of your sword design without causing any damage to the rest of it. So we're coming back down to my trusty block, and what we need to do when we're hammering a piece that has already seen some curvature, we need to make sure that we're only putting flat sections onto the block. The first thing I'm going to do is just hammer lightly from both sides. You can twist that and turn that so you can get as much of that hammered as possible. And what I'm doing now is making sure that I'm changing the shape of the wire to be slightly flatter. Now at the moment this is just a flat hammer, but if you want to add some of that texture like we see in this particular piece, you can use the round side of your hammer. And it just adds a little bit of surface interest. If you've marked your wire in any way while you're working, hammering like this is a great way to kind of disguise any tool markings that you may have accidentally added. So we've got a little bit of texture on it now. So I'm just going to pop the block back out of the way and my hammer too, and take a closer look at some of the examples that I've brought to the table today. So this one, rather than the two wires at the top coming together and moving around in a circle, they went their separate ways and became lightly hammered coils. These have got just some little jump rings in to replicate how you could add that onto a chain. This one here has no gemstones whatsoever and has been hammered really quite firmly. And at the top we've gone for a very, very classical jewellery style bail, very similar to the one we've just made, and then kind of low key with just a single gemstone. This is a faceted labradorite in the centre. As I mentioned before, you've got so many ways that you can make these your very, very own. Adding gemstones on the ends of the handles is a classic way to make that look really interesting. So you can imagine adding one in there is another dynamic altogether. But they are absolutely fabulous. And like I said, in the 6 or 7 years or so that I've been making them, I've never made two the same. They're great fun. I hope that you enjoy the tutorial today, and I look forward to seeing you back with me very, very soon. Bye for now.